Oh hey, welcome to my crib. Come inside, I'll show you around. Welcome to Arimba National Spice Factory, where even the meth heads are getting accommodation, as you can see here. So what better place to talk about my 76 series? And yes, I know I've made a video like this in the past, but a lot has changed, so we're going to find out what's new. Plus, these sorts of videos tend to get lots of views, so we can also consider this an algorithm experiment. So before we begin, write something in the comments, I don't even care what, and reply to someone else's comment, and make a new friend in the comments section. Anyway, let us begin. Now I guess it's appropriate to start at the back, because there's not much there, just like anything else that's Japanese. Starting with the rear bar. Now this is obviously a K-Mar dual swing-away bar, and I'm not utilising it to its full potential because I've only got one wheel fitted. And this is because I don't really feel the need to have 2 spare tyres fitted to my car, mostly because I've never in my life had a puncture or had a bead fall off the rim. So once you open the back doors, you can see a few more things that might be interesting. And in the back are the things that I see when I'm not driving. So I've got 2 drawers, one's got recovery stuff, one's got not recovery stuff that you can eat. Got a fire extinguisher, a fridge that contains a jacket. Got some 12-volt power ports there, USB here, a useless voltage meter, and in here is a twin compressor ARB which I use for my tyres. That feeds down to a tank. Over this side, I have my 2 40-volt sockets, and I can plug my GME radio handheld into this, which means that I can not have to be in the driver's seat to use it. That's turned on here, and all the secondary battery and stuff is contained under here with all these delightful electronics, and that's a 2000 watt inverter there. Now this thing is the shunt for the battery monitor, which is down here, shows you your percentages and your time left. Random loose wire that needs to be covered up. And then I have my interior lights, and I did have a rear light, but I've taken that out because it sucks. Moving on to this side is the original prototype for the table that we make. Now that just flips up like that. And the reason for this is so that you can open your drawers and still have access to them. Because I'm sure you've seen these other tables that flip down, but then what are you going to do with your drawers? So that's about it. Now on the rear bar, we have Karen. You might remember her from the airbag video where I fitted the steering wheel. 3, 2, 1. But next to that is the outlet where I can fill up my tyres, and this has this little armoured plate which protects it from all sorts of horrible things during my adventures. And I made that in this video. Now for suspension, this has only got a 2-inch lift, believe it or not, but I also have 35-inch tyres, and it doesn't really take that much to get them to fit. All I've had to do is manipulate my inside guard there, and that's about it. These are using the standard GXL rims. Nothing comes into contact except the tiniest bit of scrub on the front of the bull bar, but that can be changed later with a grinder and welder. Now, as with a lot of the things on this suspension, it's not very average. Now these are some Old Man Emu shocks, and the springs are the medium rate Old Man Emu springs. But what you'll notice is that I've spaced down the shocks a little bit. And what this allows you to do is utilise the full range of travel. So if I was to take out the spring and compressed this shock all the way up until it touches the bump stop, the shock would still have about 10 or 15 mil left of travel. And the advantage for this is that it gives you all kinds of extra droop, which in turn benefits your flex and your ability off-road. Now moving on to these horrible things. Now, I'm not usually one to bag out someone else's company, especially ones who claim to make the strongest rock sliders in the world. But when the rock sliders they make do not meet my expectations, then I have no problems with it. Obviously, these are Legend X, and they are one of the most expensive ones on the market. Now, my expectations for rock sliders are that they protect your bodywork from rocks and things like that. But these ones do nothing more than just protect the frame rails, which don't really need protection. Here's why. Now, if I hold the camera in line with the bodywork, you'll see that you can't even see the rock sliders, which means that the rock sliders are closer to the body than the furthest part of the panel is. And this means that if you have a rock or something, it is going to gouge the shit out of your panel before the rock slider even does anything. But at least the rock slider won't get damaged. Anyway, Legend X owner, if you end up watching this video, hopefully you're open to constructive criticisms instead of rolling your car. However, if you extended the mounts 50mm towards me, these would be the perfect rock sliders. But right now, they're not. But I'm going to do this modification in the future. Now, switching over to fisheye cam, the rear of this car is where things get a little bit more interesting. Starting with the things that someone asks me about every other day, either in the comments section or on Instagram, which is my rear suspension. Now, these are the Terrain Tamer heavy duty parabolic springs with a twist. Now, what you'll notice is that this has 3 springs and it's missing the load spring at the bottom, which doesn't actually do anything if you're within the load rating of the spring. And what I found is that as I'm off-road and I still had that spring attached, what I would find is that the car would flex up until that spring engaged, and then it would just stop all up travel on the wheel. Now, there's been a few people that I've seen who've copied this idea, and it seems to work for them as well. But I'm going to go balls out and claim that I was the one that did it first. So suck it, comments. Anyway, what this does is similar to the front end. It allows it to travel all the way up to the bump stops without doing anything wrong. And combined with that, on the bottom of my spring pack, you can see I've got the low profile U-bolt hangers. And those just stop you getting caught up on stuff like every other LandCruiser seems to do. Now, all I've had to do to make this modification work properly is add a little spring retainer here. And what that does is it obviously stops the springs shifting and causing horrible problems off-road. Now, the final part of the back end are these shackles. And these are a modified version of the superior engineering ones. And no, I did not pay anywhere near to the $900 those guys are asking. Now, firstly, if you do a bit of research on these shackles, you are going to find so much rubbish information on forums. And these are from people who don't have a fundamental understanding about what they're for. Now, I've read online that people have criticisms starting with anything from your car's going to do front flips down hills with these shackles on them, ranging to it does nothing more than make your car look like it flexes better. Now, the second one is partly true. They're not going to give you the advantages of having a spring that extends that much. But what it will do is take the weight off that side of the car that's trying to tip you over. So if you think about a wheel and a differential, the wheel's about 50 kilos on a 35, the differential's say 100, and if half of that weight is being taken away from the force that's trying to tip your car over, then you're not going to tip over where another car otherwise would. So I guess the benefit of these drop shackles is the equivalent of having someone hanging off the side of your car trying to stop it tipping over. And as you can see in loads of videos on YouTube, it does actually help quite a lot. So keep that in mind. Now, there's quite a lot of stuff going on in the front of this car, so I figured I'd fisheye distort myself to let you see it all in one shot. So these are the steady spotlights. To be honest, I think I prefer HID lights because they have a slower warm-up time, which means that your retinas don't melt off. And in the middle of that is the controller box for my Warn winch, which is a 12,000 pounder. That's the GME antenna. This was robbed off a Jeep Wrangler because I think a shorter one was better for getting into car parks. And one of the last things I've gone for is a flat link, which is one of those $50 AliExpress ones, and they work fantastically. Now, looking underneath, you can see that I've got recovery points there and a bash plate. And again, these are generic eBay jobs, and even though they're not rated, I would put money on the fact that they'd be equally as strong as anything else, simply because it's just made of 12mm steel. You can't really go wrong with that. Before we move on to the engine bay, what I've also done is put these clear covers on the headlights, and these are 70th anniversary headlights, which are a very cosmetic gimmick, but I don't care. Now, as you can see, it's a little bit muddy in here, but this is because I haven't really got around to waving my magic wand for a while. So I'll start with this side. This is where there's a dual battery setup, and these are connected so that they have double the amperage and the same voltage. And this is good for if you want to use your winch while the ignition's off. And that's all connected to this DC-DC charger. I'm not sure why Red Arc calls it a BC-DC, it must be some kind of marketing hype, but it's a DC-DC charger. But these aren't actually charged by the solar panel. All the solar panel's doing is feeding into the back to charge that third battery. Because firstly, I don't really go on trips where I'd need that much power, and secondly, nothing I've got draws from the power when the engine's off. So things like that do become a little bit unnecessary. One thing you might notice is that I've only got the factory fuel filter. And this is because I'm not a big believer of aftermarket fuel filters. And the reason behind this is because any kind of finer filter that you use is of course limiting the flow. Which means that Toyota uses a filter about this deep. If you wanted to halve the number of microns it can filter, you'd have to have something double the size to achieve the same flow. Roughly. And for this reason, I don't want to put any strain on my fuel pump because they're more expensive. So all I do is if the light comes on, I will replace the filter immediately. Now moving over here, I've got a catch can, but I also don't have an EGR system hooked up to this car, which means that this is almost pointless. Going back to the same reasons why I don't use an aftermarket fuel filter, I may actually remove this simply for the restriction it might have, which causes extra crankcase pressure. And I think that's about all there is to consider on this side. On the other side, I've gone full JDM with a washable K&N air filter. And then all my auxiliaries are controlled by these fuse boxes here. The ones that are controlled inside the cab with those green buttons that you saw before, that's under here, and these ones are the constantly powered things. Now moving over here, this is the air compressor that powers the lockers. And if I have a leak further up the system, for example on the air tank or at the other compressor, I can isolate this compressor and still use the lockers, which is quite a good little thing. Aside from that, not a whole lot's been done. Like I mentioned, the EGR is gone, and it does have quite a good tune on it. Now coupled to that is an upgraded turbo and a full exhaust system to sort of help that out. And to make sure I'm actually able to put down the power, that's all going through a heavy duty clutch. So it's pretty much good to go. And as if by magic, we are now on the roof. Another one of those things I get a lot of questions about are how I attach my rooftop tent. And what you can see, there are all these brackets. And they're for aligning it. I put the tent on the crane, lower it down onto the roof, and then I use over-center latches to secure it. There's 4 of those on each side. And the last thing up here is this light bar. Now I actually think that these rooftop mounted ones are bloody useless because all they do is they light up the bonnet and blind you at night, which doesn't really do much. But I can safely say literally the only reason I have it is because it stops my roof rack whistling on the highway. What I've also done is mounted my rooftop tent ladder mounts to the roof rack rather than the tent, because this obviously allows access to the roof rack when the tent's not on there. On this side, I've got some side lights. It's the same on the other side. And everything is quickly disconnectable. So one of these plugs is for the power for the tent, the other one's for the solar panel that goes on top. And then I have 2 more plugs here which are for disconnecting the LED spotlights. So this is the interior of the 76 of Dreams, and this is where I sit sometimes. And I'll start with the elephant in the room, the steering wheel. So that's from a Toyota Orion, and I did a video about it which you can see somewhere up there. And all of these buttons are fully working. Well, not all of them, because this head unit, which is a Kenwood head unit, only has scope for 12 programmable buttons, and obviously there are more than 12 buttons here, which means I can't use all of them. And this was done by connecting all the buttons to a Toyota Hilux clock spring in the back, and then running the wires up to the back of the head unit. Now, a certain company that resells Toyota parts with their own brand name on them told me this couldn't be done. But I'm sure this is just a ploy to get people to buy their crap, which doesn't seem to work very well. Anyway, if you want to play at home, you can pretty much use any Toyota steering wheel, run it through a Hilux clock spring, and do whatever you want with it at this end. And the whole process takes about an hour, so don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Next on the list, phone holder. It's quite good. Even if you're not using it to hold your phone, it's still fun to play with while you drive. And tucked behind that is an ultra gauge, which is quite useful for making sure your car doesn't cook itself, even though it's nothing more than a gimmick at the moment because nothing goes wrong with this car. Down here I've got all my controls for lockers, compressors, things like that. These are for my spotlights, and that's the useless idle up which you don't need in Australia. So over here, this is a GME 330C radio. I was going to get the 370, but I think the only difference is that the body has a speaker contained in it as well as here, which makes the extra price kind of useless for me, seeing as I've hidden mine back under the dash, and I have an external speaker put in there. Which means I can actually put the speaker wherever I want, which negates the need for a 370 altogether. This thing is something I'm going to rip out at some stage. This was when I got the car, it had airbags, and I've ripped those out because they limit your flex and they're pretty useless. Those are the switches to pump those up, and the gauge or whatever. Now, I'm not normally an advocate for Ram products, but I think this is the best thing that they can make. It's an untippable cup holder, which means that you don't need passengers. I've also got a cute little light here, which charges off your cigarette lighter. Marvelous. Never used it. Winch controller there. It's wireless, so you can just pop it out. And I've got all my controls for spotlights and things like that are down here. Now, being a GXL-ified workmate, these are where my electric window controls are. And I've done away with the factory seats and put these Recaros in. And those are an absolute godsend. These are the electric ones, so they're electrically adjusted. They're heated and cooled, and they do pretty well. And that's about it for the interior. Now you get to look at my face through a fisheye lens. So this pretty much concludes me talking about cars. If you have any other questions on things I haven't covered, ask them in the questions and I'll probably answer them. But if I don't, it means I just don't like you. Now, the main reason for making another video like this is because a lot of stuff has changed on this car since I've owned it. Now, in some of my videos I've also attracted a lot of negativity from some people, claiming that I don't know anything about suspension and that my car is set up completely wrong. Well, to those people,